Lando Norris is on the verge of breaking a Formula 1 record, but unfortunately for him, it's probably not a record that he envisaged breaking, as when he finished second at the recent Brazilian Grand Prix, he equalled the stat for the most podium finishes without actually taking a victory. Lando's P2 finish in Brazil marked his 7th podium finish of 2023 and confirmed just how amazing McLaren's resurgence has been in the second half of the season, where it's gone from being back markers in the first couple of races to now being regular podium contenders. But more than that, I think it also confirms that 2023 has marked Lando Norris's best season so far in his Formula 1 career. Lando started 2023 with just 6 podium finishes to his name, but with the 7 that he's added this year, he's now up that tally to 13, which matches the record for the most podium finishes without taking a victory that was set back in 2011 by ex-German Formula 1 driver Nick Heidfeld. Now, Heidfeld was regarded by many to be one of the best Formula 1 drivers of his generation. He raced in Formula 1 between 2000 and 2011, and during that time he got a reputation for being extremely quick, if not a little bit unlucky, hence why he was never able to win a race. But during those 11 seasons in Formula 1, he did manage to finish on the podium 13 times. 8 times he finished in second place, with the other 5 being third place finishes. Heidfeld raced in nearly 200 Grand Prix during his Formula 1 career, but he was never able to stand on the top step of the podium. So I thought that with Lando now equalling his record, I thought it would be a good time to sort of compare their careers and try and establish why, in Heidfeld's case, he was never able to win a race, and why Lando hasn't been able to win one so far during his 5 seasons in F1, and if or when he's going to be able to achieve this. So let's start by running through all of their podium finishes and trying to work out if there were any missed opportunities for a victory, or if their performance on the day actually merited the result that they actually ended up getting. Starting with Heidfeld, he actually made his F1 debut back in 2000 with Prost, but it wasn't until his second season when he moved to Sauber that he scored his first podium finish, which was at the third race of the season in Brazil, when he finished in third place behind David Coulthard and Michael Schumacher. And on that day he really did get the maximum performance. He was quite fortunate that a few drivers ahead of him had dropped out, so really he didn't miss a chance of a victory here, so the result that he got was merited. But Heidfeld would end up waiting another 4 years before he'd stand on a Formula 1 podium again, after leaving Sauber at the end of 2003 without another top 3 finish, and then a year at Jordan in 2004 was spent mainly at the back of the grid. But his performances that year earned him a drive for BMW Williams, and that by far was the most competitive car that he'd been able to get his hands on during his F1 career up to that point. And during the year he'd scored 3 podium finishes, the first coming in Malaysia at the second round of the season, and then another 2 coming in Monaco, and then at his home race at the Nürburgring, the European Grand Prix. Again, none of these podiums that he scored in 2005 were missed opportunities for a victory, although he did start from pole position at the Nürburgring, which turned out to be the only pole position of his career. Heidfeld then moved along with BMW to rejoin Sauber for 2006, and during the year he scored the team's first ever podium finish at the Hungarian Grand Prix when he finished in third place behind Jenson Button and Pedro Della Rosa. But on that occasion, during what was quite an eventful race, at no point was he really in contention for victory, so his third place was the maximum result on the day. Even though BMW Sauber were more competitive in 2007, Heidfeld would actually only stand on the podium twice that year, finishing second behind Lewis Hamilton at the Canadian Grand Prix in a race that really Hamilton controlled, was never really challenged for the win, and then he'd finished again behind Hamilton and Ferrari's Kimi Raikkonen at the Hungarian Grand Prix. But it would be 2008 that would end up being Heidfeld's most successful season in terms of the amount of podiums that he scored over the year. He would stand on the podium 4 times that year, as BMW Sauber again were more competitive and actually were kind of outsiders for the championship, regularly pushing McLaren and Ferrari. Heidfeld would end up finishing second 4 times that year. The first of those came at the first race of the season in Australia, with the next coming at the Canadian Grand Prix when he finished second behind his teammate Robert Kubica, and then he finished second again, this time at the British Grand Prix, and his final podium would come at the Belgian Grand Prix at Spa. Now, in 3 of those 4 races, Australia, Spa and Silverstone, it was more a mixture of a good strategy or some great driving from Heidfeld himself that was key to him finishing on the podium that day, but he was never really in contention for the victory. But it was at the other race in Canada where he did actually have a chance of winning the race. It was a race of attrition where the other main contenders were either making mistakes or crashing out of the race. But Heidfeld had stayed clear of trouble and was running in contention for victory. He was mainly fighting his teammate Robert Kubica, but he would end up losing out to Kubica by the simple fact that he was on a different strategy. While he was on a 1-stop, Kubica was on a 2-stop strategy, which was the favoured strategy for that particular day. And clearly Robert had a pace advantage where he was able to build enough of a gap ahead of his second stop to come back out ahead of Nick and go on to win the race. Heidfeld would end up scoring just the 1 podium finish the following year in 2009, as BMW ended up slipping back down the order as they failed to hit the ground running with the new regulations that arrived for that year. He would end up finishing second again at the Malaysian Grand Prix, which was the second round of the season, after a close fight with Timo Glock's Toyota, but he was never really in contention to challenge Jenson Button's Brawn, who would end up going on to win that race, but ended up being red flagged at half distance. Then after BMW pulled out of Formula 1 at the end of 2009, Heidfeld spent most of 2010 on the sidelines without a drive, but he did end up making several appearances for Sauber at the end of the season, and this was enough to earn him a drive for Lotus Renault for the following year in 2011, where he would end up scoring his 13th and final podium finish at the second round of the season, again in Malaysia, where he finished third behind Jenson Button and Sebastian Vettel, never really again being in contention for victory. It was simply down to the fact that he had an amazing first lap, where he managed to make a few places at the start and then was able to maintain a solid pace throughout the Grand Prix. He would end up being quite harshly sacked in the middle of that season after a difficult run of races where he didn't score points, and this would end up being the end of Heidfeld's time in Formula 1. So like I said, out of all of Heidfeld's 13 podium finishes, only really one of them was a missed opportunity to turn it into a race win, which was the Canadian Grand Prix in 2008. But apart from that, all of the other podiums were achieved through other factors, mainly strategy, luck, or Heidfeld's great driving. So now we're going to run through Lando's podiums and try and see if there were any missed opportunities on his side to turn a podium into a potential first victory. Lando's first podium finish came at the first race of the season of 2020 at the Austrian Grand Prix, where he finished in third place behind Valtteri Bottas and Charles Leclerc with a great drive, where he managed to finish within 5 seconds of Lewis Hamilton on the final lap, who was carrying a 5-second time penalty to beat him to the final place on the podium. But at no point during that Grand Prix was he in the fight to win the race. Although Lando didn't end up scoring another podium again that year, 4 podiums would end up coming along in 2021 as McLaren built a competitive car. The first of those podiums came at the second race of the season at Imola, where Lando finished in third place behind Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton. The next podium would come in Monaco, where again he finished in third place. But then in Austria he finished a step higher on the podium when he finished in second place, which was at the time his best finish to date. Even though all of those podiums were good performances, he never really had the car on the day to be able to challenge for the victory. But that wouldn't be the case at the Italian Grand Prix at Monza later in the season, when Lando really did have an opportunity to win his first Grand Prix, but he was beaten to the victory by his teammate Daniel Ricciardo, despite the fact that at times Lando did look the quicker of the two drivers. But in the end it was Daniel who came through to win the race, with Lando just behind in P2. Sadly for Lando, just the one podium finish would come in 2022 as McLaren took a step back in the first year of the new regulations, where for the second year running he would finish in third place at Imola. He would end up having to wait more than a year before he'd stand on the podium again, where he managed to break his duck at this year's British Grand Prix with a great drive to second place behind Max Verstappen, and he'd follow this up at the next race in Hungary with another second place behind Verstappen. Now these results came after McLaren introduced their mid-season upgrade, which elevated them from backmarkers to regular podium contenders. But during the race, although there was a clear step forward in performance for McLaren, Lando was never really able to fight Max properly for the victory. Lando would then end up putting a run of 4 podiums together, starting with Singapore, when he finished in second place just behind Ferrari's Carlos Sainz. And even though he had a chance of winning the race, he finished just 1 second behind Sainz at the checkered flag. He was never really in a position to be close enough to try and overtake Sainz, because he was more focused on trying to work together with Sainz to prevent Lewis Hamilton, who was catching them at a rate of knots on much fresher tyres, from getting close enough to overtake them both and beat them to the victory. Another strong drive to second place at Suzuka was then followed by a third place finish in Qatar, but looking at this race it should have been a much better result for Lando, because on the weekend McLaren and he clearly had the pace to win the race. Lando had already missed an opportunity to put his McLaren on pole position in Friday's qualifying session when he got a track limits breach on his final lap, and then he missed the chance to put it on pole for the sprint race when he made a mistake on his final lap at the final corner. And then in the race, after starting further down the field following his track limits breach, he wasn't able to work his way forward enough to give Max a real headache and a challenge for the victory. He then managed to take another second place finish at the following race at the US Grand Prix, where he actually managed to take the lead on the first lap and actually led for the majority of the first half of the race, until he was overtaken by Verstappen, who then built a lead over him and won the race comfortably. And this leads us on to Lando's most recent podium finish at the Brazilian Grand Prix earlier this month, when he finished again in second place behind Verstappen. But on this occasion, particularly early in the race, he really put Verstappen under pressure, and at one point he nearly overtook him. It was then when Max built a bit of a buffer, but Lando's pace actually throughout the Grand Prix was pretty similar to Max's. But in the end, you have to say that Max's pace was probably too strong for Lando to try and win the race, so it wasn't really a missed opportunity to take a victory. So you have to say that looking through all of Lando and Heidfeld's podium finishes, there was definitely opportunities for each of them to take a Grand Prix victory. But it's not just the fact that on the day that certain things didn't fall into place for them. I think if you look at their careers, you also have to say that there are certain other factors that have come into play as to why they've never won a race. In Heidfeld's case, the obvious factor is the fact that he didn't drive for a top team during his career, which probably does seem harsh on BMW because they were competitive at the time, but they were never really good enough to regularly compete for victories with Ferrari and McLaren, who were the two top teams in Formula 1 at that point in time. It's well known that Heidfeld came close to driving for McLaren for 2002, but he missed out on the drive to Kimi Raikkonen. So I think that if he had got that seat, things would have turned out very differently in his career. As for Lando, I think it's been more of a mixture of circumstances that have been both in and out of his control. If you look at Russia 2021, for example, where he started the race from pole position and led for most of the race and was looking likely to take his first Grand Prix win, but then the late rain shower, he made the wrong strategy call by staying out on the dry tyres, and in the end he slipped back down the order, having stayed out too long on the dry tyres. But you could also say that Lando's been unlucky in the fact that he's driven during two dominant periods in Formula 1, because when he arrived in 2019, it was during Lewis Hamilton's dominant period with Mercedes, and now Max Verstappen is dominating with Red Bull. So the fact that he's driven against two drivers who are among the greatest of all time, this has also played a part in why he hasn't won a race. The good news for Lando is that four drivers went on to take 15 podiums before they scored their first Grand Prix win. And more than that, Lando is bound to win a race at some point. He's too talented not to, given how close he's come in the past. It's more of a question of when, not if, he's going to win a race. So I don't think he has anything to worry about. I think the first win is just around the corner. So that was my run through of the unwanted record that Lando is on the verge of breaking. But do you think we can actually win a race before he has any chance of surpassing Heidfeld's record? Be sure to let me know in the comment section. And if you're new around here, don't forget to like the video and to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.